Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Career Coach podcast. Today, we have another amazing guest on the show, and this show is all about uncovering tips and tools from young professionals in their late 20s and their early 30s that can help college students get insights, get experience, get knowledge that can give them guidance along their career journey. I really struggled to get this kind of information when I was in college. I went to Yale, I worked on Wall Street. And now my passion is to help students be successful. And so this show is all about extracting value, extracting insights, and sharing them with you. So grab a pen and paper and take notes, and feel free to get in touch with us afterwards. Enjoy the show. Alan, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you on the Career Coach. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here. It's definitely been a long time since I got to talk to you, so I'm excited to catch up.
Yeah, it's great to have you on the show because I think your experience, especially at scale, which I'm excited to share with the audience, is going to be super exciting for kids to listen to and to unpack your journey. So, I mean, that's always a good place to start. Is for you just to give a little bit of your background. Where did you go to college? What did you study? And how did you land up where you are today?
Yeah. So I can tell you a little bit about that. So I graduated from Brown. I studied computer science. I was going to study applied math, but I think one thing at Brown is they make you take a ton of courses that you don't normally take. So I actually dropped my applied math halfway through. I was like, I'm just going to take a ton of fun courses. Um, but then the way I actually got to scale specifically is kind of roundabout. I actually had a friend who I met studying abroad would recommend travel abroad programs that had started at scale 6 months earlier. They kind of graduated earlier. And then they had reached out and was like, hey, Alan, like, I'm at the startup. It's a ton of fun. I know all these super smart people. Do you want to, like, reconsider your entire life for the next year and a half and move out to the Bay and like start working at the startup instead? Um, and I think at the beginning that sounded really crazy, but they're very consistently badgering you for a long time. And eventually, I said yes to interviewing. I got the job. They convinced me to move out, and then I guess the rest is history because I'm still out here. Um,
So that's great. So what exactly does Scale AI actually do?
Yeah, so we do a lot of things now, but the primary mission of the company is to accelerate the development of AI. And that can mean a couple of things. So on my team, we work a lot with large like ML teams to provide them the type of data they need to train their large ML models, right? So the most recent example I can give is in back in 2019, actually, we were the people who did some of the early data for GPT-3, which powered the first chat GPT, right? Now, GPT-3 had been around for 3 or 4 years before ChatGPT made it like the hottest thing on the planet. But we do similar stuff like that with like large ML teams for like autonomous driving, for classic computer vision. But nowadays, a lot of my time going forward is actually spent on what we call multimodal data. So working closely with our customers, being like, what do you need to build a good model? Whether or not that's software, that could be more data, that could be like review and evaluation. All of these kind of things have a life cycle to building that model, and scale kind of helps at every single point of that life cycle right now.
That's really interesting. So was the company relatively small when you started, and has it seen like quite big growth in recent years?
Yeah. So I joined pre-series C. So what that means is like I actually joined the company was quite small. I think I was employee like 50, or there were 50 people when I joined. Now it's like over 1,000 people, I think. So definitely seen a lot of like growth since then. Company has definitely 20x. Um, yeah, it's been wild.
Wow, that is wild. That doesn't happen very often. And I'm sure it's obviously got a lot to do with the massive investments that have happened in the AI space
Mhm.
for sure.
Nope. Yeah, I think we've gotten very lucky. I think normally, I think going through your career, like you go through a lot of there are like a lot of different stages. I think we had the big AV boom, but then when COVID happened, a lot of that turned around. But I think nowadays with the new generative AI boom, for it's also seen like a lot of growth and investment. So I think it's definitely been. I think no one saw this 5 years ago when I first joined, but I think it takes a lot to like just pivot and capture that. So it's been very cool.
Yeah, for sure. So, what exactly is your role in the company?
Yeah, so I'm an engineering manager at Scale. I have a team of a little more than 10 engineers working under me. Um, I primarily serve as like a liaison, I think, between our customers and our engineers, and then just making sure like all the stuff internally gets done like as quickly as possible. But yeah,
Did you start off as a coder or a developer and then move into that particular role?
um, it is actually like a really long, funny story, right? So in the classic startups move fast, I joined actually as a product operations manager, right? But when I interviewed, I was supposed to be in engineering. So I had done the interviews, and my manager, when they that put on my contract, that like was my hiring manager, the person who was gonna like be my boss, was like this engineering manager. And I think the original plan was I was gonna write a lot of code and like help them with like operation stuff, maybe a little bit. But then in the time between I signed the offer and I joined the company, they had like split the people who were gonna join, made a new org, said we need this org that like's gonna help us run the company, and we're gonna call it product ops, right? So I kind of got put in that org. I was there for about a year. I wrote code. I like traveled to like work with a lot of our like workers around the world, and then I actually switched back to full time engineering after about a year. And then from there, I became the engineering manager, and I've kind of just either had people join my team or I've taken like more scope on from like other teams, and that's kind of how I got to where I am today.
Did you ever think that you were going to be an engineering manager at a global big AI firm when you were in college?
No, no, that definitely some pivots got to get here. I'll say that.
Yeah, it's quite interesting how, your career and your future when you're in college is like never really quite goes the way that you think it's going to go when you're in college, right?
No, definitely not. I mean, I like it's funny because I feel like I had more career pivots in college than the average computer science student, right? Like I interned at big tech for a while, so I interned at Facebook, now Meta. But then the next summer I had like pivoted 180 and like dropped tech completely. I went to go work in consulting at like Bain and Company, which is like a big consulting firm here in the US, right? And then it was like senior year when I was coming recruiting, I think my parents were like, Alan, you gotta go do business and like all this like finance stuff, right? That's like the way to go. And I'm like, don't know if I really like that, mom. Sorry. Um, so I was like recruiting for everything. I was like even thinking about going and back and getting like a PhD or something. Um, so I think really had a lot of different like career tracks in college and like a lot of different options trying to even do full time. And I ended up doing honestly, I ended up at Scale partially because my friend keep badgering me about it. So, um, I mean, like I don't regret like any of it, I think, but it is definitely one of those like if you told me at the beginning or at any point in college until I joined Scale that this would be what I'd be doing, I probably would not have believed you at that time either.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you could go back to speak to yourself when you were like 18 or 19 years old as a freshman, a sophomore in college, what advice would you give yourself, knowing what you know now about the world and careers? What would you say?
Yeah. I mean, I think there are like two big pieces of advice I would give, right? Like, I think if you're younger, and I think I was exploring a lot at the time, right? Like, it's totally good to take risks, right? It's totally good to explore and try new things because, especially when you're younger, that is like what the best time of like your life is to do that. But when you take a risk, like, also like invest really hard, right? Like, you want to actually dive as deep as possible, move as fast as possible in that space, like learn as much as possible and like really experience it for real. Because I think ultimately like people think they like things or they like imagine a future, but when they get there, oftentimes it's not
Mm.
what they expect. Right. Like this is maybe like the classic, a lot of people go into finance and after 2 years they just quit, right? Because I think they realize this is not the life they wanted, even though it might have been, or like their needs change. So really just going and doing it and taking that risk and like experiencing it, that I think is one big piece of advice that I would give to my previous self. um, and then also just like in every single job, I think one thing I found very helpful is try to find someone who's like done it before, if that makes sense, right? Even if you're pivoting or even if you are just like starting off, like look for someone who's really successful maybe, or like just a couple years ahead of you, because they've kind of like blazed the path for you to at least mostly follow, right?
Mm.
So when I know that's like from a recruiting standpoint, like I remember when I was doing all these recruiting paths, I talked to all these people who had either gotten the job or had just been out of college to get the job. And I was like, what did you do to like get into this like industry? Like, what did you do? Like, what do you know that I really should know now? Right. And they, I think, were like monumentally helpful. And even in my current job, like a lot of times I look at like someone who is going to be doing the next job ahead of me or someone I like really respect or admire. Right. And they're like only a couple years ahead of me. I'm like, how do I become as good at you at this in like as quickly as possible? And, you know, if they're good, they're usually good at telling you what they did, and it like really accelerates, I think, a lot of the exploration too, and like just like development.
No, I think that's excellent advice. I think when I was in college, I had all these ideas of what I wanted to do. And I think I tried to do it all myself. And I wasn't, I didn't reach out to people like you say who had done it and ask for advice, maybe because I was too nervous or I didn't know how. And I think, just like you say, for a college student who has an idea of something they want to do, those two things: one, invest in getting the skill and the knowledge so that you understand it. And then two, find 3 or 4 people who are on that path and just ask them for help, ask them for guidance. And they might just say one thing that can completely accelerate your pace at which you can do that. So, yeah, I mean, those are great tips for college students who are thinking about really accelerating the pace of their careers. I mean, I'm really interested in your particular career path. I mean, it sounds specifically like, engineering management, but in the AI space. But how could somebody who's, studying computer science or maybe not even studying tech actually build a career that is like similar to yours?
Yeah, I mean, actually see this all the time. Is we don't at scale, we don't just hire engineers. We actually hire a lot of people who like will help us do like the operations or like the engagement with customers. And for the most part, like AI knowledge in the world is like probably like a fraction of a percent of the population, right? Or even of the job market applicants. A lot of the people we hire join and just learn on the job really, really quickly, right? A lot of
Mm.
times they just have like some really core skills, like they're good communicators, they know how to ask questions at the right time. They take, we would say, like real ownership of like their own job success. So a lot of times like we have someone join and they'll just like barrage with being with questions or like do a ton of reading on like the space, and like we'll obviously help them along as much as we can, right? And you kind of see these people after like a couple months on the job or a couple years, they kind of become experts in like the space that they're working with. And you would think like, hey, this person who's like never written a code before, like doesn't really have any like experience building models, but they've just been in the space and they've been doing their research and they've been like working closely and asking the right questions. And some of them go off to work at OpenAI to help them build their models like a year later. And I'm like, 2 years ago, you were a business analyst and now you're working at OpenAI building models, right? And I've kind of seen that happen. And honestly, I don't think it's anything like unique to each person. It's kind of just like what you're willing to put in to learn and grow, right? But I would say like the AI space is very new, right? So I think a lot of people are just entering. So it's anybody's. I think anybody has a chance to do it right now.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because I think when you're in college and you see the word AI in front of a company, you feel like, oh, it's like, I'm not a professional. I don't understand it. I can't go into that space. I need to be like, studying statistics and data science and all these things. And I agree with you. I mean, these are companies that do many different things. They might specialize in AI, but they've got customers, they've got operations, they've got products, they've got all kinds of things. So it does make sense to, follow an industry that is growing and exploding, but not necessarily have to be as technical as you think. And then once you're in that space, you can start to learn about all the different aspects of the technology and kind of forge your own road forward.
Yeah, definitely. And even one thing I would add to that is like, and I feel this very much at a startup. It's like half the time no one knows what they're doing,
Yeah.
right? Like I think especially today with like the big AI boom, like a lot of the largest companies or like a lot of all these startups, no one's ever built anything like this before. Like maybe they have some experience, but a lot of people are just trying things out really, really fast, right? So there's not actually like that much gap between you and the next person between knowing. Maybe they have like a stronger technical foundation, but a lot of the stuff is like built in the fire, I would say, and like built in experience. And the earlier you start gaining that experience, the faster you'll catch up or even surpass, honestly, a lot of people.
Yeah, so that's actually another really good piece of advice is, if you're a college student and you want to get ahead, most likely starting to invest in AI skills and developing those skills is a good idea, right? Because you can see that it's not really going away. If anything, it's accelerating, right? So, let's say I'm an 18, 19-year old, like, what should I be doing in terms of getting AI skills, or what, how can I implement it in my daily life so I can learn to use it? Would you say, what advice would you give in terms of that particular type of way of learning?
Yeah. I think there's a few, right? Like, I think, first of all, if you're studying computer science already, right? Like, there are a lot of like very basic online like learn to do these AI things classes, right? And even if you aren't like taking like an introduction computer science class online is really helpful just to have you understand how like the world works, right? So just at a baseline, like the technology for the world's only going to use more and more technology, right? And like one of the great things is like places like Harvard put their entire CS curriculum online as video recording lectures. So you actually have access to like Harvard CS school if you really need to, which I think is just like on there online for free. But other things I think you can do are like there's a huge open source community around AI. There's a lot of people, and for in the tech world, open source means people who put things online for free and just like give it off to like try to accelerate other people's development and growth, right? And as part of that, like a lot of non-technical people get very involved in that community, even either to like test things out or like try it or demo. And that's something I think actually anybody can do, right? Just like go and use these AI products and like think about wherever you come from, like where these might come in handy, right? Or like where they might be used. Like I think a good example of this is like ChatGPT blew up partially because like anybody could use it and then people found flaws with it. And then those people helped make the model better by doing like different types of work or like flagging it, right? Like basically like alerting like OpenAI about the issues. But now that there's that same type of community doing it for what we call Llama 2 that was released by Facebook, that's open source. And then I think Google recently also put out another like open source model. It's called Gemini. What's like a shorter version. Yeah, a shorter version. And a lot of times the open source community is like a great place to start like meeting some of the experts in the field and like seeing what's cutting edge and what people are thinking. So getting involved there I think is always really good. But otherwise I think find some friends, go and try and build a small AI system. And it's honestly like you can do it in I pedantically say this, I guess, or like maybe that's not the right word, but like everyone's like, I built a ChatGPT replacement in 200 lines or like under 100 lines of code, right? I think there's a lot of guides online just to go out and try and get your hands dirty a little bit.
So, how would you go about building an AI system? Can you give me an example?
I mean, honestly, if I wanted to build a quick one, I would probably actually just write to ChatGPT how to build ChatGPT in 100 lines of code and it would actually do a pretty good job today. So I think that's pretty cool. I think depends on the AI system, honestly. So like a good experiment, I think you can do is you can do if you there are like a lot of guides online on how to build a basic like LLM, and almost any of the videos they will have like a short, maybe like 5 to 6 like minute read about like how it works, and then it will just give you like the starter code for it, right? And by the end of like the tutorial, it's usually something you can just run on your own laptop without very much effort, right? So I think that is something you can definitely do if you feel like you have like the technical chops to, like if you've taken a basic like computer science intro class, for example, you can probably work your way through it. Now, like if you don't know like what a variable is or like what an LLM stands for, right? Like the guide is probably not given to you as an audience, but I think a lot of these guides are actually targeted at like first timers who've never actually worked with AI or ML models before, right? They're actually targeted at like the broader audience, which whether or not that's like a college student, an engineer that's been working not in the AI space for very long, right? Or just somebody getting into it, right? Like a lot of these guides, I think, could be very useful to people, or at least have been very useful to me.
I'm actually going to try to do that tomorrow. I'm going to try build a little version of ChatGPT using one of those guides and see what it's like. So that's a really cool tip. Where do you think AI is going? Like, what is the trajectory? What does the future look like? I mean, you're very close to, you know, big tech, and I'm sure everyone's talking about it in your circles. I guess there's two versions of where this question goes. Is like one is like, where do you think the world's going, and how does this impact the future of work? Because if I'm thinking like I'm a college student, should I be learning to code, or is AI actually going to be doing the coding, and should I rather pick something else? So the future of work and how that actually impacts young people.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a big topic right now in a lot of circles, not just my friends, I'm going to be honest. Um, I think like I'll give you like my personal take, right? But I think the space is moving super fast, and it's honestly like a lot of things might change, right? I think for a lot of things, learning to use AI as part of your job will become like astronomically more important, right? I don't think it'll fully replace a lot of the jobs that we think it will replace for a long time, right? Or at least a lot of the jobs will be becoming using that AI in different ways, right? So I think an example I think about is like back in the old days when we had like automation coming out, everyone thought like, oh, like if robots came out, like they'll just take everybody's jobs, right? Like you don't need a human for anything, or like if you're like have a sewing machine, you don't need that. A lot of those are just end up being, now there's a person running the robot, there's a person using the machine, right? And I think in the same way, humans will continue down that path where like we will be using AI to accelerate our like daily jobs. But I think that still ultimately is like 5 to 10 years away, like at best. And I think a lot of people say it's earlier, but it wouldn't be widespread. So I think for most times, like you should follow still like the job that you want to do for now. I don't think there's like anything coming and pending that people will actually have to be super worried about, right? And I mean, obviously, learn to use AI if you're a coder, it'll speed up your coding like by 3, 4 times.
Mm.
But to say that like the software development job or like the medical field or like any of these jobs for classification might disappear in 5 years, I just don't see that happening, or at least I don't think we, even as like a society, want to just trust a robot to like do everything without us overlooking it, right? So I think that's like a really big one. I think in terms of like where AI is going, right? I think there's a huge push, I think, now for like personalization of AI, right? Like with these chat GPT models and these like big foundation models, like we have a lot of power in like just one thing now. Before, like you might build a specific model to do A or a specific model to do B, right? But I think ChatGPT, for example, isn't like 30, 50, 100 models that like is good at like answering questions about this or like drawing images or stuff like that. It's like one foundational model that we use to like answer any question that you might have, right? And I think that is something that's like very different more recently in the AI field. So like a lot of these like big, I would say omnipotent or like very like general models have become very powerful, and like getting that general model to answer like very specific like personalized questions or like being able to work with you as like a personal assistant is
Mm.
like kind of where the entire industry is trying to go right now.
Yeah, I mean, I use ChatGPT every day for various tasks. If I wanted to like improve some of my writing or to generate ideas, and I actually think it has actually sped up my ability to produce output probably by 2 to 3 times,
Hmm.
and it seems to be improving. I mean, when they released a feature that you could upload a PDF and read a PDF and gather data from that. That was a game changer, which I use all the time. So I think as a college student, you should probably be using ChatGPT as an assistant the whole time. I can even see a scenario where you upload your resume and you say, I'm looking to apply for this kind of a job,
Hmm.
research this company, help me tailor my resume for this particular thing. And by the way, prepare me for the interview with some sample questions that I might get. And it can actually sort of run an entire kind of simulation for you.
Hmm. No, definitely. I mean, it's like I just did this right now because I wanted to see if this would work, honestly. Um, like I think if you don't actually have the resources like close by, right? Like you can actually, I just asked ChatGPT to write me a resume template for me to fill in for a computer science job, and it's going. And honestly, I'm looking at it, and it's like it's pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, I would really use it as a career assistant, actually looking for jobs and having it prepare simulations of different environments. Are you using any particular AI tools, not besides ChatGPT in your like daily life?
My daily life. I mean, I think at work when I was writing a lot of code and GitHub Copilot came out, that was like a game changer for like a lot of people, and myself included. It's kind of like autocomplete for like your job essentially. So it's even as like a student, if you want to like try it, I think you should totally try it because it helps you like see what other people have basically written before you. One of those like I'll start it off and then you can maybe fill it in kind of ideas, right?
Mm.
So I think that's like super good for a lot of like students learning or like exploring things for the first time. I'll say teachers probably will not like that because if you do a DFS, it will actually write the algorithm for you sometimes.
Mm.
Um, but other than that, I honestly don't use too much AI in my daily life. I take the occasional Waymo ride in San Francisco, but other than that, I'm honestly like having 2 feet on the ground, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. So, what are some unexpected lessons that you've learned, in the last couple of years in your career that were unexpected and maybe taught you something new that you wouldn't have experienced otherwise?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really good question because a lot of times, like, we train people to have a certain set of like skills that, while very useful in the job, doesn't actually help you get through your job at the end of the day.
Mm.
I think one of the biggest ones I've actually learned is probably, or maybe not lesson, but like pieces of advice that like will try to be concrete about is like, um, when you're communicating with people, right? It's not what you actually say that matters; is like what they actually heard. And I think in the job workplace at my startup, right, like there is a lot of confusing terms and people don't read like long descriptions, right? So a lot of times like you have to really think about like how the audience is going to take what you're saying and like potentially misunderstand what you're saying, right? And then that kind of like, I wouldn't call it like persuasion because a lot of times you're just giving facts and that is like it becomes like a fact that this is the right thing to do or obvious answer. But that type of communication or speaking is really important in like a workplace, and I don't actually think that's a skill that's taught in school. And I think that's actually what a lot of people mean when they say this person's a good communicator, is that they've made something easy for me to understand, right? Not that they are like good at writing or phrasing, right? But I think a lot of these people, a lot of times, like two people are on the same page and they just can't actually find the words to convey themselves to move
Mm.
forward, right?
Is that a skill that you learned while you were working, just over time?
Yeah, I actually that's it's kind of funny. I actually think one of the best ways I learned this skill was actually through a hobby I had. So I'm like a competitive ballroom dancer on the side, I would say, or like amateur competitive ballroom dancer. And a lot of times when you're dancing, you have well, not in ballroom dancing, you it's a partner's like a sport. So you spend a lot of time communicating like what you are trying to do or feel or like fix with your partner. And there are times when I first started dancing that that communication was really rough, right? Like I'll say like I'm feeling this or like I'm doing this and like this is what I, but it didn't actually come off that way. Like they understood it as something completely different. And I think it takes time to build the skill of like I think you actually understand what I'm saying. I think this is the best way to like get it to you, right? But I think this might not make sense for everybody. So I generally just say like, has your significant other ever misunderstood something you said because like they just didn't know you well enough, like you didn't like do it in a way that helped them understand it? And that usually lands better with my friends that don't dance. They're like, yeah, don't understand any of this, but this is what I say when that happens. So I think a big part of that has actually helped me like understand, even in the workplace, like people are just trying to get the same thing done on completely different pages of intent. And sometimes that causes friction and that slows the whole system down, right? But ultimately, I think when you fix that, I think one of the best things is like suddenly you become a person everybody wants to work with, right? And it gets really easy to get a lot more stuff done, right?
Yeah, 100%. I was actually not a great communicator when I first started my journey as an entrepreneur because, I didn't do exactly what you said, which is I said what I wanted to say, but I didn't really take the time to think how someone else was going to hear it. And I guess I lacked empathy in the beginning, trying to get stuff done in a high pressure environment.
Yeah.
You sometimes forget how other people might feel when you speak to them in a certain way. And so I think that's a good skill to develop early on in your life is that awareness and that empathy and that active listening. So that even if you're like in an interview at a job, you're not just speaking to say something, you're reading the other person's body language, you're understanding how they're interpreting the situation. You're asking questions to actually listen to what somebody's saying so you can build up your ideas. That doesn't come naturally, I don't think, to a lot of people. So it is definitely kind of like the art of communication in a way.
Yeah. I'm curious actually how you picked it up because I feel like you're actually a great communicator and like you all maybe you have a secret background in ballroom dancing that I don't know about, but I feel like I picked it up through a very like unconventional like route.
No, I think for me, when you run a business, you forget that you have this power, and you just tell people what to do and how to do it, and then eventually you get feedback. Like in a job or in a work environment, it's the ultimate feedback loop. So we might run a survey, and I think everything's great, and three people are like, "Oh, you said this, and it made me feel unsafe," or that my job was under threat. And I was thinking back to myself, I never meant that at all. And then I had to like, okay, wait, I have to be quite cautious with my communication style. I have to be aware of what I say. I can't just say anything. This is important. And so I started to practice better communication skills. I even read some books about communication, which I recommend people do, because I would say that it's a very sort of underlooked skill set that needs to be developed. Speaking of which, do you have any books that you're reading currently or have read recently that you think should be read, or your number one book out there?
Oh, so I the book I generally recommend for everyone when they like first asked me about the startup space is actually it's called 0 to 1. I think it's by Peter Thiel if I remember.
It is. I've read it.
Okay, cool. It is probably one of my favorite books of just like a different perspective on like how to approach the job, your life, work in general. And it's centered around like how to build a product, right? Um, and I think ultimately, like, I think it was originally created from like a Stanford course, which like every other book I feel like in the Bay Area author comes out of a Stanford course. But highly recommend as anybody who's just like trying to figure things out as like a young professional. I think it helps give you a lot of ideas of ways of thinking that are just like aren't normally taught in school or like you just don't run into unless you're like deep in the startup space. But yeah, I think that's probably my number one. And then I think I read a lot of biographies. I think unfortunately Elon Musk's biography is actually quite good, but I would not always recommend everyone to follow exactly in his footsteps. But I think he does a lot of things that are like people feel extreme, but you can do it in better ways and like actually do help with stuff. I mean, Steve Jobs' biography is also like this, but I feel like a lot of these people have like, um, they're more edgy, if that makes sense, right? I think some people are like into them, and some people are like really against them. But I think a lot of things they do actually still like are good ways of progressing your career forward.
Yeah, I highly recommend reading biographies. They're very interesting. They give you a completely different perspective on the person than you thought. I mean, I read Steve Jobs' one. I read Richard Branson. I've even read like rock stars, and I'm always like, wow, these people's lives were outrageous, and it inspires me. I think in life, it's always helpful to pick up that inspiration from other people because you'll think this person was perfect like Steve Jobs and then realize that he got fired from Apple at the age of 40 and he made it back and you're like wow, this human being went through such crazy circumstances and kind of gives you hope that anything is possible in a way.
Yeah, I feel like that's really important, even because like I can imagine like you as a founder, right? Like you were like trailblazing for a lot of your career, right? Like there's not that many people that you meet every day that's like been down the path that you've been working on or like explore new things, right? And I feel like a lot of times like if you are doing things for the first time, like you need to look at other people who've kind of done that and like people look at for you and you're like, how am I ever going to do this huge difficult task? And you realize like there are lots of people who've maybe not done the thing you've done before, but like it's not as perfect as it seems, and like you can probably get through it, right? Like I think there's a lot of new things in the world that take risk and that's hard, and this is like I don't know, it's cool to listen about it. It takes a good story to tell like later on if nothing else.
Yeah, I think that's one of my big goals in life is to just get to that point where I can write an interesting biography. Whether I've made a lot of money or not, if I can have an interesting story to tell, I'll be quite happy.
Oh, the book sells, you'll make the money anyways.
Yeah, that actually brings me to my next point. I know you came to Cape Town when you were at Brown.
Mhm.
What was the reason that you ended up coming here, and what was your experience like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to remember, that was like so long ago. If I had like a solid reasoning, I mean, I think I was still a freshman in college at the time, and I think I was honestly, if you like said go travel to South Africa for a summer, learn a lot of stuff, meet a lot of cool people, and then like just try it, I feel like that is a very convincing sell to most college students off the bat, right? So I think definitely I think it was like I felt really anxious about it at the time, I remember, because it's like a big travel decision, like you're moving internationally for like 4 months or something, and that's not something most people do, right? But I think it was like probably one of the best, I think it's like probably one of the best eye-opening experiences people can have, is to truly like live in a different country, because then actually that communication aspect and that cultural aspect, it's like everything is thrown over the
Mhm.
side of the boat, if that makes sense, right? Like there are like the people are different, the way people live their lives are different, the type of, you meet people from a ton of different facets of life, both like in the programs I did there and then also like just meeting the different people in Cape Town. So yeah, I think just wanted to explore the world as quickly as possible, I guess, and that was like a very successful way of doing it.
Yeah, what do you think was one of your favorite memories that summer in Cape Town?
Um, I remember we did this like was it a bus or like group tour to like eastwards, right? And then I remember we were either at like this big waterfall, and I remember having to bungee jump like some 200 meters or yards or like something over the side of a bridge, and I was not going to do it, but then very slowly the peer pressure has built because everyone else in the group was doing it, and then eventually deciding to jump, right? I think that was something I never thought I would do like normally, I guess. I feel like that's really big. And then I don't know, I mean like I really liked the company I was working with at the time. I worked at this place called Over, which was like the way I explain it to like the people who ask me what I did is like I built a camera for iOS before Canva was cool, right? And now look, and Canva is huge, right? And I think it was actually a startup at the time still. It was like an iOS startup when the apps were like super, super hot, right? Um, and I think the people I met there also had like a very different way of thinking, which I like really appreciated. And like I had a lot of coworkers like from the program and then also from like the company that like I still keep in touch with every once in a while. And that was like I think really nice.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always awesome for me to hear how our experience has impacted students because a lot of my work was designing these experiences to open people's minds and to take them out of their comfort zone, have them learn a lot. And actually, our number one goal was always to help people build a sort of well-rounded skill set in a specific skill like data or software, and then have them get the real world experience, and then say, okay, we want to help you shape your career because of these experiences. Yeah, it seems like that sort of did help you on your journey in a way.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think like I remember like I think one thing I think you guys do a really good job of, I experience is like you guys do a great job matching people to the type of companies that they want to work with in a foreign country, which I think is like really unique, right? Like I think like when I had filled out like the form for like where I want to go, right? Like I was a freshman at the time, right? Like I knew nothing. There was like a bank on there. It was like I think it was like Barclays, and it's like, oh, here's a big name bank, right? Like I obviously want to work there and like put it on my resume and stuff, right? And I was like completely wrong. Right? Like they put me with Over at time at the beginning. I was like, I don't know what this is. Like this is like a startup. Like why would I work here? And then they like it just fit so much better, especially after hearing about my friend who like worked at the bank later on, right? And I think that's like I think like a personalized touch, if that makes sense, that you don't normally get. And like they like actually understood like my goals or like the type of person I am and like where I would like and exceed better. So I think that was like really cool, I'll say. I remember that's one of those like that's not what I thought I wanted, but you knew better than I did moments. And those are always like very valuable, I feel.
For sure. So just switching into a sort of a different space for a little bit because I really want to understand this in your life is, obviously working in the real world is demanding and can be mentally exhausting in a way. And what I've noticed with a lot of students is they can be stressed and full with anxiety because they've got exams, they've got their careers to figure out. There's a lot of competition. And so burnout is real, anxiety is real. Um, I'd love to hear how you sort of manage your mental health in your life and, what habits or systems do you have in place that have like helped you cope with demanding work environments?
Yeah. I mean, I think like this is really relevant because even at a startup, right? Like a lot of us work a lot of hours, right? And I think like burnout's real for a lot of people that like join and they're like, wow, this is more than I ever thought it would be. I think for me personally, right, like I think I have like a pretty serious hobby in dancing, I would say. So I think having that as something else to like focus 100% of my like brain power on when I'm at is like a really good like refreshing change for me, right? so like even if I go and like go dance for a couple hours in a day and come back and work, like I feel way more refreshed and energized like after that, right? And I think a lot of people say they can't like find the time for it, right? But I think like whether or not it's going to the gym, like doing something you really enjoy, like I think adding in something that is like not work related, that like kind of like acts as a refresher for your day is very valuable. Because I think like the college student mentality, like it's just like sit down, don't leave my desk, 12 hours, pull the all-nighter, right? But like sometimes doing the things that are better for like your physical health or your mental health, like drastically actually increase your productivity in the long run, I would say. So I generally recommend stuff like that. I also just think like life is long. You don't have to take it that seriously. No one cares about your GPA after college unless you're getting a PhD, and even then, they barely care about your GPA sometimes, right? Like, try to make it fun. It's not that much. Like, you should work hard, and you should take life seriously, right? But if you take yourself too seriously, or like berate yourself at every point, I think that things aren't going well. Like, you're never gonna be super happy with like yourself or the results you get, right? So I try very hard, I think, because I'm a manager now. Like a lot of my reports are very into being like, this isn't perfect. I got to do this faster. I'm like, this is a good job. You'll do better next time, right? So I think it's important to try your best and do all that. But I think if you can never even agree that you did a good thing, sometimes the entire job just feels like a bad, negative experience on repeat, right? And it's kind of sad to see people live their whole lives thinking they haven't done enough with it, when I think life is supposed to be enjoyed. So even if you're working hard, you got to find a way to enjoy it, I guess.
Yeah, I can definitely resonate with that because, I've achieved such amazing things in my life, but for some reason, I've always felt like I haven't achieved enough. And I actually, at one point, went to see like a business coach or business therapist, and he said to me, you're comparing yourself to like the Steve Jobs. Like you're doing well, like relatively speaking to most people on the earth. You've started a company, it's growing, you've got employees. And I actually had to like shift my mindset and learn how to be kind to myself in order to actually enjoy the process of living, you know? So I think, as a college student, if you're at a good school, like, that's great. You should be, grateful that you're there. If you're like learning new things all the time, if you've got friends, like that kind of thing, those are all amazing things to have in your life. And your career is generally going to work out if you put the hard work in and you build a network and you get work experience and you pick a path that you're interested in, generally speaking, you're going to have great opportunities. And I think that idea of being very hard on yourself actually kind of slows you down in a way. It's like you block your flow of moving faster. So it's almost like counterintuitive to say that as you relax, you kind of like go faster in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I think this is like, this is one of my favorite stories actually. So this is like a very side tangent. But like, is Hamilton big in South Africa? I don't know if this is like a thing.
Yeah, 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 definitely.
So one of the original cast of Hamilton is actually from Brown. And I don't remember what he majored in or anything like that, but one of the things was like he was writing like lyrics or working on like as a teacher or something on the side, but he had nothing before Hamilton, if that makes sense, right? But it took him, like, he kept working at it. He like, I think he was like talking about how like he slept on subways, like he was like crashing on friends' couches, right? Like he didn't really have a career in this like industry, and then he landed Hamilton, and then like 1 year later, he was performing for the president, and 2 years later, he's here at Brown giving a speech, right? He's like, the person that you know today did not exist 2 years ago, right? Like that person is monumentally different than who I am now, but it's like through that person that I have died and become reborn into the person you see today. But now this is all you see, and the death before was never real, or something like he did it like poetic, like Hamilton rap style poetry, right? And I was just like, this hits very hard. So I think a lot of times, like even if you don't even see the success now, like being just excited to do the thing, like being able to like approach it and like love doing it, like it works out, right? It might just take a little bit longer, right? But then you never know what will happen like later on, because ultimately like they come as opportunities, but timing isn't guaranteed, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And what would you say, you know, is the importance of networking in your world? Because what I find is that, if you can be good at building relationships, at creating community, at looking for mentors, that will really open up so many doors for yourself. It's not easy to do, and it takes a little bit of courage. But like in your world, how would you, you know, encourage a college student to build their network in the professional world?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this is gonna sound maybe counterintuitive, but don't do schoolwork and go join clubs and like find things that other like you enjoy doing with other people, right? Like there are like professional clubs, right? And those I think are really helpful because like obviously everyone there has a shared goal of getting like the job, right? But like sometimes like I mean I did a dance team, right? There were people on the dance team a couple years older than me who were like also studying computer science or doing consulting that I was able to ask for advice, and like I still keep in touch with them. Like I think there are lots of clubs like I did a robotics club just for fun, right? And I also did like I don't remember what else I did. Wow. Like I like wrote for the newspaper for a little bit, right? Like these aren't like anything related to my current job. Honestly, like writing for the newspaper never helps, isn't really something you use in computer science, but like I met a lot of people there who ultimately were like very valuable to my career success. And it was never through like doing something aimed at my career, right? Part of it's just like doing things with people who you enjoy, that they enjoy working with you, and like meeting these people. And I think that's honestly one of the best parts about college is that like you can just join a club and then meet a ton of new people, and everyone kind of has like this camaraderie that they'll help you out with later, right? So yeah, maybe a little counterintuitive, but just go search out for things you want to do and find like-minded people, and honestly they'll help you out, right? Like at least I got helped out a lot, and I definitely try to pass that forward. So I think
Yeah, yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, I always felt like it was a very competitive world, like it was no one wanted to help me out. And then when I got older, I was like, if someone sent me a message, I'm definitely going to help them. I've got 10 minutes to chat to you and give you some advice about your career.
yeah.
Um, and I should have actually joined more clubs when I was in college because I played sport, which was cool. I was on the squash team, but I could have definitely gone out there and, joined the entrepreneurship club or joined the investment club and try to learn that through that way. I didn't really think about it that much when I was in college. I was more focused on like you say, just doing my courses. And I guess I was studying engineering, so there were a lot of courses, but
There's a lot of work in engineering.
a lot of work, and a lot of it doesn't really seem to matter in the real world. But it definitely taught me discipline, which I think is probably one of the top skills I had when I left, which was that ability to just sit down and work hard for 6-7 hours, which actually gets you pretty far in the working world.
I'll say that definitely gets you further than a lot of other people. That if you can just focus on something for 7 hours straight, I don't think that's actually a common skill.
Yeah, I mean, it's another really good skill for a college student to learn is just how to focus. Put your phone away, sit down, make a to-do list, and actually just like get into that deep work zone, that zone where you're actually immersed in the project that you're doing. One, you're probably going to do it faster, and two, you're probably going to have a much better result in the end.
Yeah, yeah. I think putting away your phone is actually it's surprisingly hard if people actually try. Like you ask your friends to do, it's actually surprisingly hard if you need to do your like studies. So that's definitely
Yeah.
going.
Alan, we've been talking for 53 minutes. Can you believe it?
No, it actually flew by. Wow, that's actually insane.
It does fly by, when I send my podcast out to people to listen, they always say, try and make it 40, 50 minutes. And I'm always like, but we're just talking about such cool stuff, I don't want to end it. But I think, in terms of attention span, we'll probably try to keep this one under 55 minutes. So
Don't listen on 2x speed. Don't worry.
You've shared some incredible insights in the world of AI. I've learned a lot. I find it fascinating the work you're doing. I'm just inspired by that risk you took to join a startup, and that startup exploded, and now you're kind of like at the forefront of the future, working in a company that's really pushing the boundaries. It's incredible, and I want to encourage the people listening to this episode to go check out Scale AI to see what they're doing, to apply to different jobs there, to know that you don't really have to be an AI expert to go into the space, and to just like start learning now. Start using AI, start experimenting. It's only going to set you up for the future.
Yeah. And I think one thing is like, I think most of the people who listen to this podcast are like young professionals or on the younger side, right? Like, I'm only like 5 or 6 years into the workplace, right? Your career is very long. Like, if you think you're behind or you need to catch up, like, there's plenty of time, right? Like, you have like your whole life ahead of you. I think people get like too tied down in the, I need to get something done now, but like, probably be alive until like 100 at the current rate. Like, you're not even 20% through your life sometimes. So don't hold yourself too like seriously. You should like go out and actually do the things you want to do.
And stay curious at the same time, so that you're always kind of learning. And I think for me, that's the key, is like that curiosity, to be like, okay, let me just see what this is all about. Like, that might just open up a whole new door for you.
Yep, definitely.
Okay, Alan, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I look forward to sharing with the audience. And as everyone knows, if you share this podcast with 5 friends, you get access to a little networking program that I've created that I think will help you with your network. We're trying to grow the subscriber base. We give away more free courses. I might actually be contacting you to help me make like a little AI course that we can give away, even if it's like a 30-minute Loom tutorial. That would be quite a cool thing.
Yeah, definitely. We need more people in the space. It is
Exactly.
so hard to find people in the space actually still sometimes. So happy to help.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Alan. I really appreciate your time today.
Well, thank you to you too. I'll see you later.
Cheers. Bye. And that's a wrap. What an amazing episode. I hope you all enjoyed it. Please don't forget to go onto the Spotify link, like and subscribe to the podcast, maybe leave a review. And if you want to see the video, you can go to the YouTube channel and watch it over there. But the best part of all is the newsletter. So every week we send out a newsletter, the Career Coach newsletter. This will give you access to additional information, show notes, tutorials, book reviews. So I highly recommend that you sign up and subscribe to the newsletter. And as always, feel free to get in touch with me on LinkedIn if you have any questions. And see you soon on the next episode.